people will call it competency porn.
Right.
It's people who are so good at their job and want to do the best of their job, and that's where the conflicts come from.
Right.
And it reminded me of that. Have you heard that phrase before?
Competency porn, no.
Yeah, it's the, like, not literal,
No,
you know, but the idea
I don't even
that,
know
like,
how competency porn could be literal. That's not,
it's a conversation for another time.
We must face the facts! The facts! However frightening they may be!
I'm very excited to talk to you guys about this because I will be honest, I'm not much of a war movies person. And then I was like, oh, it's a war movie about weather. Okay. But to me, it's like Conclave, where like on the surface, it's like very serious things. And then like right below the surface, it's like attitude collision, which I was very into.
yes.
So I want to talk about that because like in particular, your character gets to say so many things. Like it's like a read. And at one point, one of the characters says to him, like, you can't just insult me to my face. And he's like, I'm not insulting you, I'm describing you. Obsessed. So I'd like to talk a little bit about like that kind of dialogue and the fun of that and like where it is to kind of find the level, because you don't play it like, it feels like a read, but I don't want people thinking it's not like a drag queen level. Like you're playing it very dry.
Yeah. Well, I think he's just unfailingly honest, which is why, you know, it's what the story is about. He's saying what he thinks. And he's not. I don't think he's. I've never believed that he was a sort of particularly antagonistic person. But I suppose what a lot of the things that he says, I suppose, are what might be described as an inconvenient truth. You know, so
depending on who's listening.
Depending on who's
Right.
listening. Depending on who's listening. So yeah, I think a lot of it. I think there is fun. I think it does sound unusual to say that it's a fun film about.
I'll say it, it's a fun film about war and weather.
Yeah, you know, and you as you say, there are huge. I think there's a lot of the drama comes from, you know, a cultural difference and a personality difference, and but I think in any story about allies, there are sort of essential components that not everybody who has the same values seem to be outwardly the same, have the same characteristics, you know.
Is that one mistake?
Ike, you have to stop doing this to yourself. What's done is done.
Your character has to be a little more buttoned up, and he's more of a people person, I would say, than the meteorologist. So can you tell me a little bit about playing from that perspective?
Ike Eisenhower was, by all accounts, loved by his troops, and he cared about them intensely. And that's a fact. So he felt a great deal of pressure to do right by them. And even if that meant having the awkward and uncomfortable conversations that were essential to take place that weekend before the Monday, June 5th appointed original date to land on the beaches of Normandy, when he needed to take the opinions of all. He was the supreme commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so he did have the last word, and he did take responsibility for the entire operation's success or failure. And to make that decision based on a weather forecast may seem anachronistic to you and I living now, but imagine the circumstances.
I think the movie describes the impact of the weather very quickly in a way that I'm like, I get it. And then I think it's also interesting because between this British meteorologist and this American general, there's this kind of culture clash where I feel like there's a very American idea in the movie, particularly with Chris Messina's character, of wanting to give your boss the answer he wants, even if it's not necessarily the right answer. And that is like not your way about going about things.
Although, to be fair, I think there are just different methodologies, and I think what's interesting about it is I think that the film is so much about listening, about sort of going, okay, well, this is what we sort of know, and this is a tool. These are the tools that we can use in order to give an expert report. But so a lot of the stuff that Colonel Crick was saying had worked before. But what James Stagg was saying was that the weather climate, you can go into a certain culture, and you can say that the weather is, for the most part, predictable.
Right.
Whereas the climates in and around France and Northern Europe is very, very changeable. And then later on in the story, you have to listen again. And so it's always a little bit like the weather. We go, okay, well, there it is there. But we have to just remember to have the humility to listen in some ways. I think that's one of the most sort of pleasing things about the movie in some ways.
Yeah, I think that dynamic made it feel very modern to me. The kind of comparison is, I don't know if you guys have heard this term in regards to The Pit, but people will call it competency porn. 'Cause
Right.
it's people who are so good at their job and want to do the best of their job, and that's where the conflicts come from.
Right.
And it reminded me of that. Have you heard that phrase before?
Competency porn now.
Yeah, it's the, like, not literal.
No,
you know,
obviously.
but the idea
I don't
that
even know
like
how competency porn could be literal.
the conversation for another time.
Exactly. Let me have a little.
But
fight about
but the idea of like of people being so good at their jobs that it's like satisfying to watch because it's like that's what you hope is going
Yes.
on behind the scenes. And I think that that's part of what was so exciting about this film. That like I can't pretend I understand what it's like to be in a war room, but I felt like the film.
Now
makes-
you can.
You know what I mean? Truly.
Now you can because of the fly on the wall aspect
Yes.
of how these dialogues likely had to have had taken place.
Yeah.
Well, especially because it's that thing where in a lot of war movies, everyone is talking like this, and it's very, and sometimes they're shouting. But in this, I felt like there's such a sense of actual personality that to me, I thought this feels more like what I would imagine actually being in these high tension situations would be.
And that was the purpose of David Haig's stage play that had a long run on the West End, and the adaptation by he and Anthony Maris, our director, to the screenplay, which we brought to the fold with the film pressure, is to put a human face on what would otherwise have been, very dusty, sterile facts.
Yeah.
And to my mind, I mean, I don't think there's really a villain per se in this film.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from the obvious,
Obviously, there's Nazis, but like they're not on camera.
we don't need to underline
Right.
that there's an enemy.
Yeah.
But the enemy also share the same concerns that the Allies did, in that the weather affects us all. They'll never see it coming, was the thinking
Right.
when they made the decision to delay from the 5th, which was a Monday, to the 6th,
Right.
Tuesday, which was no small feat. I mean, they couldn't shake their fist at the sky and say, change, because
Right.
frankly, science doesn't care what you think or feel.
So that's what's so interesting to me because I also thought, like, I don't tend to think too much about how science is coming into like the war room, and I thought that was really interesting. But then on a level beyond that, it becomes about how, as much as we like to think we're in control of things, there are things we cannot control that are bigger than us.
Precisely.
Yes, exactly.
It was striking to watch.
Yeah, we have to have. Well, again, it's about the power, the power of nature, and our human power, and how we have to. I think some of our greatest leaders are the ones who have to concede that they are powerless in a certain situation, and you have to be able to ask experts to help you, and to be able to listen to them, and also to make an executive decision. It's really I think it's for that reason very moving. I think to see, for cinema audiences, I always think it's really wonderful to see people be simply good at their jobs. Just see people be expert at their jobs, and I think one of the things that I found really interesting was finding out about weather forecasting, which we say in the film people could perceive as quite dull.
Sure.
But actually, I think finding out in some small way about how the weather affects us scientifically is actually really fascinating.